Hello everyone, this is Sergey with the Be Yourself podcast, where I talk to people who I admire for being unapologetically themselves. Today my guest is Aaron MacCarley, who is a filmmaker in Ukraine, filming a documentary about our warriors, about our people. And today I'm in his home. So Aaron, thank you so much.
Hey, pleasure to be on your podcast. Thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure. So straight away, let's start by just short introduction. Can you tell us about yourself? How long have you been in Ukraine, and what's your mission over here?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I came here in February. I'm originally from Los Angeles, though, born and raised. But last 7 years, I've been living in Europe and a few different countries: Portugal, Spain, Germany. And finally, last year I was living in Spain, and when, February 24th invasion happened, I'd already been, pretty in tune with Ukraine, what was happening, not an expert, but certainly following and a supporter of, the movement here to, win the war. And I became, very much... Well, the desire to do something happened very immediately, and I began thinking, what could I do as a foreigner, but someone who lives in Europe and has experience with other cultures. What skills could I bring to the table? And I'm a filmmaker, so I began thinking, like, okay, what kind of story could I tell? And I kind of knew, as someone trying a feature film for the first time and without a huge network of, big industry or big media network behind me, it would be very difficult to tell like the frontline military story. And again, that's what I saw, the media already saturated with. And I think there's good reason for that. Obviously, the military is the focal point of the war. But I became very interested in trying to find out what life was like for civilians in Ukraine. And it was very hard to actually find footage or video of this. But I did find like a lot of written articles and, obviously volunteer organizations, some Instagram pages and such. And kept diving into these and saying like, wow, there are civilians in Ukraine doing incredible things, very risky or, generous, like going above and beyond what any person usually does for their country, their fellow man. And I decided, like, this is March 2022, I was like, that's the story I should be telling. And I think that's very important to tell because the world, outside of Ukraine needs to see that there are people in Ukraine that are, risking everything and doing their all to, help their army win the war and to help other people survive. And people need to see that there's not just suffering here. It's not just one catastrophic event after another, which does happen, but that there's also stories of light, of goodness, and of people doing really incredible things that are really inspiring. At least I was really inspired. And so that's when I, started thinking, like, I was doing this master program, but I was like, after that, I'm going to Ukraine, or at least, I'm going to make every effort to do that. And this is the story I want to tell. So that's how I got here. It's like, if you want to know more about my childhood, I could go into that, but I don't find it terribly, out of the ordinary for an American.
First of all, thank you for doing this. I tip my hat to all the people who, without proper even real understanding what's going on, they still risk and go. And you do a great job by covering and spreading the truth about what's going on. So you are focused not only on the warriors, but civilians as well, and volunteers and volunteering organizations that help the warriors. On this subject, what have been the most inspiring stories? If you can just point out some organizations or some people that you have worked with.
There's been a bunch, you know. I think one of them that really inspired me and that we've been in contact the most was a Ukrainian girl, about 27, 28. She was living in Brazil for the last 7 years and, you know, had her life settled there. Everything was going well. But as soon as war broke out, she was decided that she needed to go back. And not just go back and, you know, stay in Kyiv and, you know, there's plenty to do in Kyiv that people are doing, and that's great. But she wanted to go to Bakhmut and, you know, the most dangerous areas. And she's not in Bakhmut now, obviously that's pretty closed off, but they're still out there in Kramatorsk, and we filmed them doing evacuations, going to places that are actively shelled and, you know, helping old folks, animals, and, you know, anything in between, anything they can do. And it's not just her, there's a whole community. They're called Basue, and they're really incredible people. It's really, you know, one of my favorite experiences here. You know, despite it being in Kramatorsk and being shelled every night, hit by rockets, not us particularly, but the city.
Yeah.
It was still an incredible experience just seeing what these people do and how committed they are to their work. You know, there's Patrick, who's from Germany, who, you know, same as Kazina, goes to these areas, helps evacuate, and many other people there that, you know, put themselves on the line just to help people, and they don't get paid. I think, like, there was an interesting experience we had on one of the evacuations where the woman evacuated was apparently under the perception that volunteers get paid a ton of money. Something from Russian propaganda, perhaps, I'm not really sure. But that was her perception, and they don't get paid anything. They're doing everything.
That's why they're volunteers.
That's why they're volunteers, exactly. I mean, it's kind of in the name, but, you know, it's weird what Russian propaganda can make you think, I suppose. But anyways, their whole story and, you know, their generosity in letting, you know, just film crews come in and, like, invade their lives, but, like, totally willing to take us to, you know, the danger areas, but making very sure we were doing it in proper and a safe way. I was really, really inspired by them, and I wish to go back and film them some more because of everything they did was just so incredible to me. And yeah, but that's just, you know, one of a number. Like, one of the groups I first connected actually wrote into Ukraine with them. They're called Sunflower Scotland, and it's chaired by a man named Oleg Dmitriev. And he lives in Scotland now, but he's a businessman. But when this happened, he decided to use all his resources to, you know, fund this charity that takes, you know, massive amounts of food, or at least it did at the start. But he got smart because taking food into Ukraine was actually, he discovered, not very ideal at all when you had plenty of food in Ukraine and you could support local business. Yeah. And so he's adapting, where you see with, you know, maybe some of these, I don't know, like global NGOs, I guess I won't name any, but they still under the impression that, like, Lviv needs trucks of food. Lviv does not need trucks of food. They have plenty there, and it's rather safe. But Oleg and his team, they go to, you know, places in the Kharkiv region. We went, I think, 10 kilometers from the border of Russia to a tiny little village. That was like one of the coldest days of my life, but it was back in February. But it was really, like, inspiring to see, like, how these people, they really needed food because that area had been cut off from normal transportation. There's no, you know, shipping trucks out there. There's no Novus down the street. Yeah. It's just a village, and they're really reliant on aid. And seeing how, you know, thankful the villagers were just to have, you know, a bag of basic necessities. To me, that's pretty incredible.
Especially when you think about the people who are living their life in other countries, as you mentioned, in Brazil, and this Oleg guy, and that speaks so much to our unity, you know. And myself, as a Ukrainian, I can tell you that before the war, there is a phrase in Ukrainian, "Моя хата з краю, нічого не знаю." It pretty much means that, like, you deal with your problems, I deal with mine.
Yeah. Sure.
And deep inside, I never associated myself with this, and I think none of us did. I think this is like the heritage of Soviet Union, like, even though it's considered like this commune-based thing, there's, like, you know, and the way we come together is so inspiring, and it's something that, you know, they say about courage, that courage is not being afraid of nothing, it's actually being afraid but do it anyway. And I just felt like when shit hit the fan, that, you know, we should unite, and we should be you know, join forces to beat this whole thing. And so have you felt a real danger? Have you felt like the places where you went? Because I saw a picture of you in this area, looked pretty damn frightening. So did you yourself feel a bit afraid being there, or were you, with all these people, you felt totally safe, that you were like?
Yeah, well, there's a spectrum, right? I mean, most of our stuff has been in Kyiv, but in the, you know, Donbass area, in the regions, there were a few moments where, you know, you start to feel like, okay, there could be a rocket or such and such. I'm, you know, one of these kind of like nuts who, you know, doesn't necessarily freak out when, you know, I hear a rocket hit the city. But when I did get afraid was we actually were able to, like, fund a 4x4 and take it to the ZSU.
Yeah, I saw this one.
And, you know, kind of as a thank you or what have you, the military guys that we donated to took me on a ride through Chasiv Yar, as it was kind of like, you know, ongoing shelling and strikes, and that was an experience. I mean, that's one of those where you're like, wow, this is real. You see, you know, fields on fire that, you know, had just been shelled minutes before, or, you know, you're just hearing the constant thud of outgoing and incoming artillery. You're seeing military vehicles of all types. But again, it was also one of the most, like, moving experiences, because I got to talk to a bunch of soldiers, and you know, they're just, you know, really generous and warm people, despite everything they're going through. And to me, that gave me a lot of strength. Like, even in this area where it's like, you know, anything could happen, these guys are just like there, and they have to go through this every day, and their courage and, you know, bravery makes me feel, you know, a lot stronger too. And that was like a very meaningful experience to me, just going there. And I would definitely do it again, despite, you know, the risk.
So it's contagious. So this the courageous and courage. And I think about it, that actually what gave us strength.
Yeah.
The political will, you know, the way we stood our ground.
Yeah.
And in the like first weeks, or like into a month into, we had some soldiers dancing with their power guns, with their guns. Videos like that motivate you. They're smiling. You see their beautiful wives who are talking to them. I mean, that's so moving. Yeah.
No, I mean, that's how, you know, I really first got interested in Ukraine, was by watching that film Winter on Fire. I don't know if you've seen, but, you know, an incredible documentary from my point of view. Just when I saw that, I was like, this must be the most courageous people, like, in the world. Like, to stand there and, you know, join arms and sing, you know, the national anthem as, I forget, the Bakut or something are shooting them, the police force that was there. I could be saying that wrong. but in any case, there's a lot of civilians being hurt or even killed, and they didn't give up. And to see that was just so moving. It's the only documentary I've ever cried watching. Okay. And I've watched some weird stuff. I was like, this is something else. Like, that's when I really decided, like, if there is something that's going to happen there, like, I want to, help these people because they must have something else. And yeah, I would say it is contagious.
Yeah. You mentioned that you funded 4x4 vehicle for our fighters.
Yeah.
Can you tell about this initiative that you have? The funding one, because I know that you were involved
for that one.
For that one, and also if you have some other ones that you use.
I mean, it's rather simple actually. It's mostly just my family. My father, he's in Los Angeles, and I had just been to where was it, Kyiv, with the Sunflower, Scotland, and they had delivered their own 4x4 on that trip, or it was actually a van to one group. And the way Oleg did is very smart. Like, it wasn't a ton of money, right? Like, he finds very high-end like used car vans and trucks in Scotland. So they have the advantage of also having the steering wheel on the other side, which apparently Ukrainian troops like quite a bit, because snipers will naturally aim for the driver's position. And so if they're on there, you actually have a little extra safety. But they're also, he says, higher quality and a better value, because 4x4s within Ukraine, the good ones are naturally hard to find because they're quite needed at the front. And it was shocking to me. I mean, as a Westerner, kind of fluent in how army looks over there, because my father's also ex-military. It was shocking to me to see some of the vehicles that soldiers needed to take to the front lines. Like, there's a lot of private vehicles that have to be used because Ukraine did not have a fleet of its own Humvees or ATVs prior to recent times due to contributions. A lot of soldiers had to take in private vehicles, and not very good condition ones, and certainly not vehicles meant for battlefields.
Absolutely.
Or even rough terrain. And I was driving on some of that terrain in Kyiv region, and it's a bumpy ride. It is not a nice asphalt road. So anyways, when that happened, I spoke to my father and said, hey, can we as a family pitch in, and instead of doing such and such with this your old car that you want to fix, maybe we could make a contribution together to the ZSU, because they really need it. This is life or death for some of them, perhaps. And so through contributions of a few of us, we were able to pitch in, and with the help of Oleg from Sunflower, Scotland, he found the car in Scotland, took it over here, got it painted, and
it's got pretty cool painting, and I think it's named after water.
That's true. Yeah. So my one request was like, hey, can you name it after this American war hero, Henry Johnson? For me, that was apropos, because he was a guy who volunteered to go fight in France in World War One.
Made sense.
And no connection to the country. But again, showed courage beyond what you can expect of anyone. Fought off an entire platoon of Germans basically by himself, and was recognized at the time as a hero. But sadly, due to kind of racism and basically institutional racism within the States, he was never granted the same kind of treatment, like Medal of Honor or anything, back in the 20s or 30s, and died at age 32 of basically alcoholism. And was forgotten for many years.
PTSD maybe, or something.
Yeah, combination of these factors. Yeah, exactly. And so it wasn't until Barack Obama's time presidency, where he was posthumously awarded a Medal of Honor. But still, average American does not know who this is. So I felt that was, an apropos name for the vehicle. And it's still in service over there. So, I'm very proud of that little contribution. But
and what about some...
this flag too? You know, I donated to a squad in Bakhmut, and they sent me this lovely flag with this message: "Fuck Putin, fuck death to Russia, Slava Ukraine."
Yeah,
I quite like it. So power to those guys. But yeah, in terms of like the funding process right now, I'm actually trying to put together like a proper fundraiser to raise additional funds for some of the groups we filmed, like Animal Shelter, Base UA, Sunflower Scotland, just as thank you and to make a little extra contribution, because what's very little to someone in California or what have you could mean quite a bit to an organization here. And as someone who's potentially benefiting from a career-wise from a film, I want to give back as much as possible, because my mission here is not just to document and be neutral. It was to actually support and make what contribution I could.
I know for sure that people who come here, they give much more than they take. And just for you to know that we know that as Ukrainians. How do you find Ukrainian civilians, like people, let's talk about people in Ukraine, in Kyiv and country, in the cities that you visited? Well, here's the question for you.
All right.
Are we more similar with the Americans, or are we more different? And where do we similar, where do we differ?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. I mean, it's still something I'm sort of investigating as I'm here. Like, this is my second time in Ukraine. The first time was in 2021, but it was only like 3 days. That was also one of the times where I was in Kyiv and I was like, this city is actually great. Like, I would definitely come back here. And I found the people extremely warm. Because remember, this is August 2021 that I was here, and it's still like people very afraid of COVID in Europe and the United States especially. I wasn't one of those people. I didn't quite agree with the quarantine process. I thought it should be, more of a liberal, like choose your own path kind of thing, where, if you want to take time out, but that's a different issue. In any case, I came here and people were just like, even at that time, very warm and like, shake your hand, like, let's hug, let's go out and have a beer. And then I was like, wow, this is like quite, nice at this time, because I was feeling quite down for much of the, COVID period. The isolation is very affecting my mood and mental health. And this little respite here gave me a very, good impression of the country. And again, since being here the last few months, it's very, very nice to just, go out, and very easy just to talk to a Ukrainian in a way that's not possible in other European countries oftentimes. I've lived, as I said, in a few different ones. And of course, every country has, a wide diversity of people. But you go to Germany and you don't get the feeling like you can just approach, even all the young Germans and just say like, hey, like, you want to, hang out? Like, sometimes you can, sure. But there's a different mentality there, it seems, where it's like, we're a bit, but here, you kind of do. Like, you can, go to a bar and say like, oh, hello, someone, and they won't like, they'll be like, oh, hi, they'll talk to you. Maybe it's just the novelty of being a foreigner. I don't know. It'd be interesting to hear your thoughts. But I found people to be exceptionally generous. Like, there are interesting quirks sometimes, I think. Like, for me, the most interesting one has been like in terms of communication norms. And it could just be like translation, lost in translation things. But I find sometimes, like, the American standards, you make an appointment and your guy comes at a time. Okay. And if he doesn't, it's like, why did you fuck up? But like, here, for my internet, I make an appointment. They call me to make the appointment at 10 a.m. I'm like, okay, I'll be here at 10 a.m. Then they call me at 9:45, like, oh, can we move our appointment to 4 p.m.? And it's like, well, that's not ideal, but okay. And then at 4 p.m., it's like, no one's there, and I have to call them. They're like, oh yeah, the guy didn't actually feel like coming, so and it's like weird little things like that where it's like, oh, okay. That sometimes happen, like have happened with odd frequency, but it's hard to like pinpoint these and describe exactly even what I'm talking about right now. But in any case, like I feel like there's a lot of similarities between American and Ukrainian culture that people don't know unless you come here and speak with Ukrainians. I think you guys have a lot of great humor, which is very important to me, and there's definitely that genial like ability to talk to someone that I think is also present in a lot of the states, although differs from place to place. Like for me, comparing Los Angelinos, the average Los Angeles person, versus the average Kyiv person in terms of friendliness, Kyiv wins out any day.
Yeah.
Especially if you go to somewhere like a nice bar or club, that's where it's like the difference is amazing. When people say I want to go to Los Angeles, I tell them stay away from the clubs. Like they're filled with people who literally just care about their Instagram follower count, or how many likes they're getting on their selfies. Like that's not a myth. That's actually like the culture in many of these like high-end clubs, and they have no regard for like meeting strangers. They will literally like treat you like a freak if you try to just introduce yourself, because you're not on their level of influence or status. I've never had anything like that happen in Kyiv, and being a fan of techno music, I've gone to a few of the clubs, and it was just amazing seeing not only the increased quality of music, but just the increased quality of people who are there just to have fun and to meet others and to dance, rather than to get clout or whatever the kids are calling it nowadays. To me, that's where it becomes very, very apparent, and I really appreciate that here.
I'm just getting chills and goosebumps as I listen to you, because I can relate so much to what you're saying, and I'm also into techno.
Nice.
Yeah, on the melodic side. But we before the war we were called like a New Berlin.
Yeah, sure. And as someone who lived in Berlin, I can say Kyiv in a way has already surpassed Berlin, because Berlin, I hate to say it, I am a fan of the city. I lived there 4 years.
Okay.
I speak German. But it's gotten to the point where it's like, it used to be all about like those things I was talking about, like we come to dance and enjoy the music, but now it's like, no, if you don't wear the right like kind of leather pants, we're not letting you into the club because you're not part of this,
But it's not like on the fancy side.
Yeah,
it's more of a like
the other
freakish
the other
side.
end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
Like if you show up to the club in Berlin with like just a thong on, they'll be like, "Oh, you're the right kind of person." If I wore this to the club, they'd be like, "What? You're normal. Fuck you." Like okay, man. Maybe I just don't want to wear like tight ass pants that like make me sweat and or feel fucking uncomfortable. I just want to dance and enjoy some music. Like, fuck you, Berlin. And I've never had any patience for that. And here you don't get any of that. Like, you can show up at whatever you want. That's what freedom actually is. It's not about, some kind of competition to wear the weirdest outfit possible. At least I don't think it should be.
Yeah.
But a lot of clubs in Berlin, that's the case.
Yeah, and I have a friend who's a DJ, actually right now on his path to the international sort of market, and I'm kind of helping him. He said that in Germany people don't even bother to change the interior. The old really used places just because there's so many people that the clubs don't need to do anything. They always have packed house. And he said that they party from Monday to Sunday.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So that's scary, man. It's a lot of temptation.
Berlin has that weird thing of like, you know, you wake up at 8 in the morning, whatever day it is, and you take the tram or what have you, and you see the zombies coming back from the club. It's like you're going to work, and there's the kid like, hey buddy, you had fun. But you're right. Yeah, the interior thing is also true. Like the best lighting I've ever seen at a club was actually here at Collider Club.
Collider?
Yeah, I was blown away how they did this.
And you've seen some clubs, right?
Yeah, I've been to a bunch of places in Berlin, but you're right. They don't make an effort to decorate the interiors in a very interesting way. I mean, you're looking at like an old warehouse. Maybe they put up the speakers and then, I don't know, spray painted the walls. Like, a lot of cases, it's nothing more than that. Whereas here, you can tell they put an effort. They want it to be an experience. And that's awesome, man. I love that. And also just having fucking space, because that's also a thing. I do not like being crammed in to like a sardine house. I actually want to be able to breathe and dance if I go to a club. I don't want to pay $20 to be like, packed in like I'm in the metro at 5 p.m.
Speaking of finding your passion, since this is the name of my podcast, be yourself, stay yourself, but before you do that, you have to find yourself.
Sure.
And you said before the record, before we start rolling cameras, that you've been a filmmaker for 7 years. So how did you decide to do that? Was there ever a breaking point, or where you said enough of something that you've done before? Maybe some really courageous move that you took. I'm just interested, how did you find this something that you truly, truly love right now?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I never had the long-term job in the office because from a young age, I understood quite well that, the 9-to-5 career life was not what I wanted for my life. But it wasn't like I, was 6-year-old and I, wanted to be a filmmaker. I had a lot of different dreams through my childhood, but I think things started to coalesce around the arts around when I was like 16, 17, and I started, getting much more into reading again. Like as a child I read a lot, but then there's a couple years where I was like, super into video games. And then around 16 I was like, wait, I'm stepping back from that. I'm kind of interested in new things now and learning about the world. And a lot of it, some part of it, I have to thank this, very, great teacher I had in high school, like Mr. Padilla. If you see this, thank you. But like, he's one of those guys, like one of a million teachers that was like, didn't really care for the typical curriculum, and just made us read really good books. And like Camus was one of them. I don't know if you know Albert Camus, the French absurdist philosopher. But he assigned us this book, The Fall, which is interesting because it's not even one of Camus' most famous works. He's typically known for The Stranger, Myth of Sisyphus. But he assigned this one, and this book had like a very deep impact on me. Like 120-page book or something. It's quite short.
At 16 years old.
Yeah, 17 years old at this point, yeah. And man, this book like changed my life. It's like, wow, people can actually like analyze life in this way, but like in a very entertaining fashion. And I also started reading some other authors after that. Like, if you get into this, it's like a chain, right? Like, you find one guy, and then I would look up like who is like this, and then you go on a YouTube or Wikipedia, what have you, and it'd be like, well, this was part of this movement, and this guy talked to this guy. But anyways, this was kind of a different chain, but I started reading authors like Aldous Huxley and Hunter S. Thompson, who had very like different views of the world that I'd ever been exposed to. And for me, that like really inspired me, that I also wanted to think about the world and write about the world. And so at that time I was like, that's it, I'm gonna become a writer. So starting to read a lot and do whatever I could to expand my knowledge of the world. But again, still not a direct path, but I knew like I wanted to do something creative at this point. And I also was probably like one of the lucky last generation in the world to have the ability to get a job at a DVD rental store.
Okay.
Yeah, which doesn't really exist anymore. I don't know if
Before Netflix took
Gen Z has ever seen one of these. But it was a great little place in my hometown. And the big perk of working there is like minimum wage, but you could take out all the DVDs you wanted, after your shift, as long as they were available. And man, that year or year and a half, probably watched like 200 different movies, like the full, what I call like canon of must-watch movies. I watched all of those because I was, decent at school. I would get my shit done, by 9 p.m. and then, smoke a little bowl and then watch a movie or something.
Yeah. And
it was like, this is great. Like also learning so much about culture in the world. And so I couldn't really decide, like, all right, writing, film, I like both of these things a lot. But whatever I want to do it very intellectually and like with a, deeper, insight. So I decided to, study philosophy in college.
Okay. Which college?
It's called Reed, and I don't really recommend it.
It's a community college?
No, Reed College. It's not a community college. It's a very quite expensive private school.
Okay.
Luckily, the GI Bill from my dad, it's like a military benefit, paid for most of it. But I'm still in debt for that. It's like still in debt now, 10 years later, 12 years later. And the philosophy degree doesn't really get you any jobs either. So all in all, I paid for a really good reading list. That's about it. In any case, I also studied a lot of writing and, at that point decided somewhere in the college years that I, wanted to go into film. Because I would enjoy most, after all these classes and such, watching a film and thinking about films. And I think I still will write a book. I still like writing. But what I enjoyed most about the film process was the social and collaborative nature of it. I always quite enjoyed, because we would do this as kids, even in school, high school, like getting together and just like filming some stuff together.
Yeah.
And this was not, for Instagram or YouTube or anything. This was actually before those times, shockingly enough.
Before instant gratification.
Yeah, exactly. So you would be doing it just to like show a couple buddies, like, it was not something that was going to be published and make you famous or what have you. But it was just fun. It was just good old fun. And so I decided, like, hey, wait a minute, like I could use writing to write scripts. Because actually, in my creative writing courses, one of the things, the comments I got was like, oh, this sounds like it could be an interesting script or movie. And I was like, oh, yeah, I was I think more pictorially sometimes. So, yeah, when that, graduated finally, all my nice debt, then I was like, all right, we got this useless degree, costs a lot of money, I guess I'll go to China, and taught English there for a bit.
Okay.
Came back, and then had this period of like bouncing around from job to job for about a year.
Okay.
Just absolutely hating each one of them. And, all this time I continued reading, and one of my other, inspirations was Henry Miller, and he's a writer who writes also quite philosophically and profoundly and sort of irreverently about his life abroad, mostly, Paris in the 30s. And his books were banned for like 30 years and 40 years. And I think if they came out now, they would also be banned. We've made this weird U-turn in our culture where because he wrote very sexually and like abrasively, I don't think people like the kids these days would let it happen, which is interesting. In any case, I think he's still a profound writer. And, you know, his message was basically like, you know, do whatever it takes to live, you know, as you want to live. And if you, like, in his case, want to be a writer and live outside of this American corporate system, he's like, he packed his bags and just went to Paris and lived there for 7 years, hardly any money, you know, dirt poor. But the book Tropic of Cancer is kind of how, you know, how that experience unfolded and the, you know, the joy he experienced nonetheless, just by being, you know, quote, free person. That had a big impact on me. So I decided to do more or less the same thing.
Yeah.
And, you know, I had this friend from college who was in Brighton, United Kingdom, and that was my connection to Europe. Didn't end up working out in Brighton because it turns out the UK doesn't really want you to immigrate, even if you're American. Hadn't done my research there. This is a repeating pattern for me. But my second choice had been Berlin. So, you know, I look up.
You prefer reading books instead of reviews on Airbnb.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, I'm too busy with my, you know, creative shit, and then I forget all my logistical problems. Yeah. But anyways, I found a, you know, ticket to Berlin. I didn't know anyone there, but I was like, well, why not? And I finally made it there and said, all right, I got my camera. I got, you know, I got a visa because you could get a visa in Berlin quite easily. Yeah. And started to work. From Brighton, I ended up, you know, doing this weird traveling thing of like I went to London and volunteered on this like illegal barge for a couple weeks, and then finally from there went to Berlin, and you know, just decided like just to make it somehow. And I found this you know, under the table, you know, repair construction job for summer with this British guy who's, you know, one of my good friends, Chris now. We stayed friends since. And then I found like this brand new like little film school that was very interesting, and it was like a 1-year program, but it was like you just make as many films as possible. And that ended up being like a pretty cool experience. Just, you know, not that the, you know, level of teaching was so crazy high, but that you just got to sit down and experiment with, not sit down, but actually go out and experiment with, you know, these cameras. It was kind of just like a free rental house. Okay. Where we would just take out a camera and like go film some random shit for a week, come back, we'd all talk about our films, and then the same the next week. And made a bunch of stuff, most of it crap, but some of it's okay. And learned a whole lot just by doing it, which is what I recommend to, you know, anyone. And from then on, like, tried going back to LA for a while, working on, you know, big film sets over there, which was good learning experience, but by this time I'd already become kind of addicted to the European lifestyle, and LA just wasn't going to cut it anymore. Yeah. I couldn't see myself, you know, driving 2 hours each day and sitting in traffic and, you know, hardly seeing your friends, because basically the problem in LA is to see your friends, you're going to have to drive there, and that could take a long time. People get lazy, and then if you drink, it becomes a huge problem. It's very expensive to get Ubers, and it's a very much less social environment. And Berlin is quite different in that respect. You know, it's very well connected publicly, and so I came back to Berlin and started, you know, got the freelancer visa as a filmmaker, and just started working on whatever little productions I could.
Did you learn how to do that, like the most practice you got from this school that you were filming for? For how long did you do that?
The school?
Yeah.
The school was a 1-year program.
1 year.
So it was like an intensive, almost like in terms of, we're doing stuff all the time. So yeah, I got a lot of practice through that.
Did you buy your camera by that time?
At that time, I had my first camera. It was
cool.
like a Canon 5D or something like that, Mark II. And so with that experience, I was able to start working on like small, low budget things. But what also helped on the other hand was going to LA and getting that experience on very high-end productions. And of course, I was working on the lower end of the spectrum, like on a big crew. I was a grip, which is like a guy who's helping set up the lights and such things. But you get to see firsthand how experts are doing it, and learned a lot. Like in 6 or 7 months, 8 months of working on commercials, I learned a whole
in LA.
In LA,
cool.
Learned a whole shit ton, and I was able to take all that experience combined and come back to Berlin, and then start working more as a cinematographer, a director sometimes. Editor as well.
Do you do you fund your own movies yourself, right?
Some of them. I mean, I have plenty of passion projects. That's what any filmmaker has to do if you want to, start making things that are not so commercial.
Yeah.
But also, was able to find jobs doing music videos for, typically smaller artists. It's not like I'm working for, Beastie Boys or. Oh, that's way out of date, isn't it? Do you even know who the Beastie Boys are?
I don't know, but
Jesus Christ. Fight for your right to party, bro. Let's go.
So, and off you went, right? You were doing whatever popped into you. Not whatever, but pretty much you were the writer, you were the executor. Is that safe to say? Did you work with? Have you hired people?
Yeah, sure. No, it's different every project,
Yeah.
You get hired like as a videographer or versus cinematographers. It could be very different in many respects. Like a lot of projects in Berlin. So one problem about Berlin is that it's super saturated with freelancers. If you want to get a job. Like a freelance job, you're always going to be underbid by someone else.
By an indent.
Yeah. Someone. And so for me, that was always a frustration, is I felt like I was working for less than I should.
Yeah.
Because otherwise they say like, oh, you don't want to do it for this price? Well, we found some kid, he's going to do like 8 hours of work for 60 euros. And you're like, what?
Okay.
Like, you're just like, what? But that happens all the time in Berlin. Like, I've seen plenty of productions that are like, oh, we'll reward you. It's the classic exposure and, a doner kebab. And it's like, oh, great. Like,
Doner kebab.
Thanks for feeding me well. Like, sorry, what was the question? Like,
So there was no question. There was just contemplation.
Yeah.
Okay, basically we're here now in Ukraine, and you still follow on something that started in back at 17 when you were working in this DVD rental shop, and you still, as I believe, read a lot, write a lot, and I know that we should always kind of refill our brain with knowledge, and that you're just the testimony that you learn yourself and you also put it into action. That's the best way to learn, actually. In our day and age, as you mentioned that you prefer to watch movies and read books. In our day and age, people, especially the newest generation, prefer to watch 50 seconds videos and read 3 lines of text to get all the wisdom in the world.
Yeah.
Like, will you ever start producing short videos? Do you think it's ever possible to cram the knowledge
Yeah.
into this kind of a really short duration.
Right.
And what do you think about the trends nowadays in general?
Yeah, these are good questions for sure. To answer the first one, do I think so? I mean, I have. I can't say I've, completely abstained from the real business because sometimes you have a small little idea and all it requires is a short little 20-second thing or 30 seconds, whatever it might be, and okay, yeah, I'll put that together. But as a whole, like, I never wanted that to be a career because, look, I think those things that can be fun, but if that's all you're intaking, you're missing out on, all the value of something that's created with a lot of vision and preparation and depth. You're missing out on a whole lot. And say what you think, but I don't think there are very many, if any, like, reels that will be remembered in even 2 years' time, to say nothing of like 10 years' time. Whereas we still watch films from the 40s, 50s, even before 60s, any era. Films that really matter, we still watch and care about. Books from hundreds and thousands, even thousands of years ago, we still read. Well, at least some of us still read. And that like leads me to the trends discussion, which to me is more of the frightening part about what is happening, especially amongst the youth, but also amongst my generation, each generation. I mean, I see it even with my mom. That time that used to be spent watching a film or reading a book is now subjected to the scroll, the doom scroll.
Yeah.
And I don't want to claim that I'm immune because I see myself doing it sometimes. Because these things are addictive and people have to really realize what they're doing to their brains, and I don't think they do.
Yeah.
And it's not just like, the scrolling that's the problem, it's all the, opportunity cost. That's what I think people don't think about, because, if I'm on a date, one of my, go-to questions is like, what have you read lately? And I'd say 90% of them, the people I ask that question to, don't even have an answer because they don't read.
Yeah.
And usually when I say why not, it's I don't have time. And that's to me the most bullshit answer ever. It's not that you don't have time, it's that you don't use your time for that.
Yes, sir.
You're going to tell me you're working like 16 hours a day in a factory job and then you have to, sleep 6 hours like it's, $18.99. No, that's not your life. Like, you work at the Starbucks or whatever and you work a 6-hour shift and then you spend 6 hours on social media.
Yeah.
And then you eat dinner, maybe you go to the gym and then you go to bed. That's why you don't have time. You don't make time. And I mean, that's just one level of, the ladder there. It's like, also, even if maybe someone has time, if they're really addicted, and this is, I don't know, but I think, there's a lot of studies that have been coming out in the last years and showing that these really do have a profound impact on your ability to concentrate.
Yes.
So even say you did try to make time, it might be more difficult. And I've found this myself after, spending a few weeks away from a book, which I try not to do ever, but it's happened. Naturally you're using your phone. When you come back to the book, it's harder to stay in it.
Yes.
And you have to retrain your brain not to want to like get out of there.
You want an instant dopamine all the time.
Exactly. It's that dopamine trigger that's, harder to come by if you're used to it coming every 6 seconds or what have you. And I think this is going to have profound impact on people in general in the future. And I think there's a great lack of discussion about it because, again, we all are addicted to these platforms. And I hate to say it myself, but I'm on them because my job kind of forced me into it. People kept asking me for an Instagram.
Yeah.
And I didn't get it till 2020 or so because of COVID. I was bored as hell. And I wanted to, put myself out there, try to get whatever response I could. And now I'm just kind of stuck in this where I do find myself sometimes, like, you wake up and you look at the phone and there's some kind of notification, and then you open something and then you find 15 minutes later, what just happened?
You're never getting
20
this time
minutes
back.
later. Yeah, it's like, what did I just look at?
Yeah.
I don't even know. And it's like, man, I used to, never have that problem.
Yeah.
I used to spend about an hour each morning just reading. And I hardly do that anymore. And that really, bothers me. And one of my hopes is that when I finish this film, I can just delete all of them for a while and just kind of see what that was like again. Because, man, I remember a beautiful feeling of not having to be controlled by your phone.
Yeah.
And, I don't know if you know of the American writer Henry David Thoreau, but he's one of these writers who wrote one, tome that's timeless called Walden. And I think everyone should read it now because his whole premise was disconnecting from society. And this was in the 1800s, so it was way before phones. But he still wanted to disconnect and live by himself in the woods. And one of his quotes was, "We have become the tools of our tools." And
yeah,
that's so apropos right now.
Cyborgs, because this is an extension.
Yeah. It's like, are we using it or is it using us? It's like, and I have to concede all of the benefits. Like, someone could say to me, "Well, then why don't you just throw away your phone?" Well, shit, I still have to work. I still like the ability to contact someone when I need them. Not having to go to a payphone is pretty cool.
Yeah.
But shit, like, we are sacrificing a lot for that.
Absolutely.
And I think as a human race, we have to think about, do we want to all become like mindless scroll machines? Or should we try to like back off and maybe encourage some other things we used to do a little bit more? That's at least what I hope.
Great. I mean, wisely put. I feel like it's a rabbit hole, and but on the bright side, people like you, people like me now, we are creators, and for all of us, for all of you guys listening, just for a change, try to not only consume but create. If you need to be on your phone, on Instagram or TikTok, try to create something, some meaning, or contribute into other people's lives by maybe sharing your experience, not the stupid video of you jumping from whatever. So
I think that's a very valid point. That I didn't bring up. I mean, it is enabling a lot of creators to be seen that prior haven't been seen, and that's a benefit. And it's hard to talk like black and white on these things.
Yeah.
Because, of course, like even with what's going on in Ukraine now, it may be very, very different were we not to have social media. Yeah. If we couldn't see what was happening directly, I don't know if the support would be the same.
Yeah.
I'm rereading one of my favorite books right now. It's by George Orwell. It's called Homage to Catalonia. And it's about his experiences volunteering in the Spanish Civil War. And one of the things you hear is constantly is basically no one outside of Spain knew what was going on at all, or cared, except very political people, because it was a very political war. And that was due to the mechanics of the time. If you only have a newspaper, and the only information you can get is what the newspaper wants to tell you, and there's no way of backing or checking on that.
Yeah.
there's so much misinformation, and that's why his book is considered actually one of the best sources, because he was actually there and wrote critically of both sides, which is very rare back in the 30s. So yeah, I'm not saying there's no good in social media, but
just
I think
pick wisely how you use
engage with it.
As we close, maybe you can share some, I don't know, message to the Ukrainians, to the people around the world.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe something that you want to promote, something that you're involved in. Just some last word from you.
Oh, sure, yeah. No, let's see. There's a lot of things I'd like to promote. I mean, I think my message to Ukrainians is that you guys are really inspirational. People around the world do care and are following this, despite what you might read occasionally of people being, swept away by propaganda or Fox News or whatever it might be. A lot of us in the United States and Europe really do care and want to see Ukraine win this war as soon as possible, and are blown away by your courage and bravery. And me being here, I feel definitely that way. It's been, quite an experience, but a heartwarming one. Just to see what people have done and are doing for their country. So thank you, and thank you for the warm reception. And I mean, to everyone outside, I have to say, Ukraine is a lot more beautiful than you can imagine if you haven't been here. This city is actually one of my favorite places in the world, and despite having, being woken up today at 4 a.m. By rockets exploding in the air, I still wouldn't go back to Los Angeles if someone offered me a free ticket. Not at all. I think this place is quite a bit more fun, more vibrant, cheaper, better people, and Ukraine deserves all the support we give and more, because this needs to be preserved. This will not be preserved if Russia takes over any of it. And thank heavens to the Ukrainians who stood and defended Kyiv on those early days, because that was a miracle in many ways. So, power to you guys, and Slava Ukraini, Slava Heroям.
Slava Ukraini, Slava Heroям.
Yeah.
Thank you, man. Thank you.
My pleasure.